welcome again, everybody. It's Winston Wednesday again. I'm Samantha Brown, the corporate research chef here at the factory in Louisville, Kentucky. And I am joined today virtually by the King of California, Spencer Cole himself, our global accounts manager on the West Coast. Spencer, say hi.
Hi.
How's it going?
Good. How are you, Sam?
I'm doing well. Thank you. Thank you for helping me co-host this event.
Sure. Absolutely.
He has a really lot of great expertise and some innovative ideas. He'll also be monitoring chat. So there'll be a QR code that you can scan. It's just an easier way that you can get a hold of me and Spencer if you're really wanting to dive down into some of the set points or programs that are specific to you. All right. So today's event is revolving around unique ideas outside of the typical array of things that we have seen or done in the past with CVap. And it's all an effort to inspire you to leverage your CVap units in another way that maybe you haven't really thought of before. And we're going to be looking at some techniques and discussing proofing and baking bread. You can smell it right now. Smoking, we've got a brisket and some chicken wings that we'll look at. Extended sous vide cookery. We got some beef short ribs that we'll look at. Soup, stocks, and stews. I have a stock and I have a chili, and we'll talk about that as well. And then at the end, we have some dehydration products, dehydrated products, and we'll talk about dehydration. A lot to do in a short amount of time, so I hope you stay with us. But if not, we'll have the live event recorded on our Facebook page. Okay. Any questions to start? All right. If not, no question, fire away. Okay, so CVT, controlled vapor technology, it's universal through a whole CVap line. These techniques that we're showing are kind of pinpoint to the CHV or the cook and hold product, or the RTV, the retherm product. But for proofing, you can actually use our holding cabinet for proofing. So speaking of, let's take a look at some brioche that I have in the HOV right now. It's been proofing for the last little bit, and we'll go ahead and pull that out right now. All right, the recipe comes from delish.com. It's a great recipe. It works really well for this application. It has 3 proofing phases. You do initial sponge, you do the first rise, and then you shape it, and then you do it for the final rise before you go into bake. So for the proofing program, I'm using 100 on the vapor, 102 or 103 on the air. It gives us a really high humidity factor. It's a lower temp, but it's constant and it's precise, and you don't really have to worry about the weather outside because of that consistency. So from here, what am I going to do? I am going to take a little bit of egg wash over the top. Don't forget your egg wash. What does the egg wash do? It gives it a nice shiny shellac on the outside after it's finished.
Will you be baking those in CVap as well, Sam?
Say that again?
Will you be baking those in CVap as well?
You know it.
Awesome.
You know it. So the baking program is 200 on the vapor, 350 on the air, and I have some just behind me I'm going to pull out. So.
That looks great.
Here's our finished brioche. And while the door's open, we'll go ahead and pop this in. I'll let it bake.
So when it comes to baking and using CVap, there are some limitations. This is not a one size fits all. Higher temp items aren't suited for baking in CVap, but anything below 350 and below, give it a try in CVap. It should work excellent.
Yeah, I agree. So what are things that you probably couldn't do? I'm thinking French bread.
Yeah.
Something with that nice.
Sourdoughs.
Yeah,
bottoms.
exactly.
Anything with a hard exterior, you're unlikely to achieve that desired result.
Yep. So again, we have the brioche and then some of focaccia. And that recipe is actually Spencer's. It's actually on a blog. And if we could post that link in chat so you guys
not a
have
problem.
access to that, I'd appreciate it. It's called It's All in the Proof. It is a great recipe for focaccia.
And this it's a nice recipe because it was built around CVap to started the day before, cold ferment, and then let it rise in CVap and in the same unit, finish the cook. So all done in one shot through CVap.
Now, I did not do proof and bake in the same CVap. I did a staging where
that's okay. I don't have multiple CVaps at home, so I'm limited to what I've got.
Right. All right. I am excited to pull out some of this brioche. And of course, cut up some of the ciabatta as well. Or sorry, the focaccia. So this is meant to be a pull apart loaf.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Beautiful crumb structure. And this is an all-purpose flour recipe, which really surprises me. Yeah, all-purpose flour. And that crumb structure is just so beautiful. It's
looks great.
Light and fluffy. It's the cotton candy of bread, isn't it? But yeah, any questions on bread? Any questions about proofing?
Well, if you do, there are some answers in that link I sent through to all of you in the chat. But if you have follow-up questions, you can contact any one of us at the Winston team.
Yeah, I would like to reference our thermoisterization chart. So just to remind you that we have a chart that basically has the entire world of cooking on it, and where does a program like proofing fall on that chart. And if we could show you over here to the right, well, my right, your left, okay. Here we have proofing. So the lowest that our vapor will go is 90. So you can go as low as 90 on the vapor. And I would say no more than plus 10 on your air. You kind of want to keep that humidity pretty high. So
yeah, you also don't want to kill the yeast.
Exactly.
In that process. And that threshold sits around the 105 mark. So yeah, keep that yeast alive.
Yep, exactly. So if you just think about proofing down here, so just a really quick summation of what this shows. This chart shows this is your vapor temperature, your wet bulb, and this is the differential. It's the amount of temperature you add on top to get your air. Okay, so a differential is not your air temperature, but it's the amount of air that you're going to add to your vapor temperature to get your air. Clear as mud?
Yep.
We've got a video about that, and we can go through that whole thing for you. But
I'm putting a link into our website that has the chart for your reference, so you don't have to memorize it right now.
Thanks, Spencer. Okay, so just remember, the lower the differential, the higher the humidity. The higher the differential, the lower the humidity. So it's kind of an inverse proportion. All right, I am going to pop a couple pieces of focaccia on here and some brioche.
You can also use the ready-made doughs that come in the freezer sections that all you have to do is rise and bake. Those work perfectly. Sam just was able to knock out a few breads from scratch.
Yeah, I actually worked with a lot of Rich's products, and the petite roll, the cinnamon roll. Oh gosh, so many. Rich's has so many different proof and bake items that work really well.
Here's a question. Can you proof in CVap ovens?
Of course you can. Of course you can.
The old CACs are, I'm going to say RTVs, but I know that's wrong. The CATs you can. The CAT you might have to customize the setting. The CAC itself, absolutely. That's what I've done the focaccias in the past. Tips and settings for rich dough products for the school year from Joshua. Any off the top of your head, Sam? Set point for richest products?
Set points for proofing?
I believe baking. School products for rich dough.
Oh, 200, 350 normally. That's what I normally do for all of my bread baking. 200 vapor, 350 air. All right. I am going to move forward if no one else has any questions about bread and proofing.
And if you do, feel free to ask them along the way.
Please. Absolutely. Okay. Smoking. Can you smoke in CVap? Yes, you can definitely smoke in CVap. It does a fantastic job in smoking. But there's a couple caveats. Once it goes smoker, there's two things. It has to go under a hood. And once a smoker, always a smoker.
Yes.
So if you're thinking about turning it into a smoker for a weekend and then back to your bread proofing, lovely retherm, CHV, whatever you got, you might want to rethink that.
Or you'll scrub for a couple hours.
or take it to the car wash and, you know, spray it out, something like that. I've heard stories, but no judgment, whatever. Okay, so you want CVap and you want to smoke in it. What do you do? So you buy your CVap unit. You also get the smoker box kit. So what comes with the smoker box kit? It's a 2-piece component. It comes with this piece right here, which is the housing. It's got a low voltage heater in the bottom of it. Okay. Cutouts on the top of the lid. And then it also comes with a timer portion that goes outside of the unit. This part goes inside the unit on the bottom on a sheet pan, just above the evaporator. This pan goes outside and it gets plugged into a standard wall outlet. And then this gets connected to this guy like so.
Correct.
Easy peasy.
Yeah, so you cannot plug in the smoker to the CVap itself. There's no external plug like some other pieces of equipment out there. This is a standalone extra.
Correct. It is an independent piece from the CVap.
Correct.
Okay. So what do you use in the box itself? Well, I use 2 pieces, like combustibles, if you will. You can use chips, something that's like no bigger than your thumbnail, really. These are a standard chip that I got at Kroger. So you can find these anywhere and any flavor, normally oak, cherry, apple, and there's normally a mix. There's also these beautiful pellets, and these are, I think, do just a little bit better job. They are more dense, they burn slower, they burn more consistently. And I feel like I have a better smoke experience with the pellets and this burner. Okay, so all you do is you pop these in, boom, plug everything in, put your smoker, put this guy on a sheet pan, put it in the bottom, and then start your program. Now, I'm going to move this out of the way and grab a brisket that I've smoked previously and have rethermed. But before I do, any questions about the smoker box kit?
One item to mention before you get to the questions is that the wood chips themselves don't need to be soaked like the other pieces of equipment or other smokers. You can put them in dry.
Yep, no need to soak these. Like I said, it's a low voltage heater and they smolder. One thing to note, it takes about a little bit of time for it to heat up. I would say 15 to 20 minutes has been my experience, and I would say that's pretty typical. Okay.
Let's see that brisket.
All right. What do you smoke? What have you smoked, Spencer? What have you done before?
Some chicken, cold smoked on a chicken in CVap, and then pastrami. I've made a few pastrami's. We have one question. How does your smoker times compare to traditional smoker? So I think we can speak to kind of how intense it gets inside a CVap.
The question is, how do
times compare to a traditional smoker? Well, to answer that question simply is that in most smokers, you're using the heat from the fire or the smoke itself to cook the product. Conversely, in CVap, you're actually using the CVap technology. If you turn the equipment on in a cook and hold or an RTV to cook, and you're just adding the flavor of smoke. So a lot less in certain circumstances. How long did you cook that brisket for, Sam?
This was actually a probe cook. So you have the option in a 7 series unit to probe cook. So I cooked, let me double check, make sure I'm right. Yes, 100 on the vapor, 225 on the air, and
Okay.
I did a probe cook to 200. So I'm really not for sure how long that was.
Got it. So in CVap, in our experience, it depends on the doneness, the load, obviously, but a brisket can take 8 to 10 hours, roughly.
That's fair.
Traditional smoker, I'd say you're going to be, 14 hours. But I haven't personally done a ton of brisket on a traditional smoker. I don't have the patience. No,
So
great.
yeah, I've done a timed cook, and I believe it was just shy of 7 hours for, I think it was probably about a 7-pound brisket ish. But what I've done here is we have a whole brisket that I trimmed deeply. And when I mean deeply, I got into the 2 muscles, the flat and the point. I got into that flap and trimmed in between that, just so I wouldn't have excessive amounts of fat when I would slice this product. And it's personal preference too. So you do you. And this is how I did this guy. Just a little salt, pepper, and garlic on the outside. It was a probe cook to 200, 100 on the vapor, 225 on the air. And then this was an overnight cook. So it was hands off. I put it in, I started the program, added chips to my smoker, walked away and come back the next morning, and I had this beautiful brisket.
So one thing that I do want to say before we move on, because I think it's really important to hear, we advocate that our equipment does not need to be used under a hood. When it comes to the smoker, make sure it's under a hood. It does just plume with smoke.
So I'm just going to slice a couple more here. So for retherm, like I said, I did this cook last week. Retherming, I did 170 on the vapor, 190 on the air for 2 hours, and it got up to temp, and it's turned out beautifully on the reheat.
Yeah, it looks great. It's too bad I'm not there.
Too bad, so sad, all for me. Ryan's like, you can smell it. So
come here.
I used to be
do you mind muting yourselves?
Oh, thank you. Yes, please mute yourself as you come in. Much appreciated. Of course, if you have a question.
Yeah, there is one. How much smoke was on the brisket? How long did you set the timer?
I set the timer for 6 hours. And that is the max on the timer. Of course, you can keep re-upping on that timer.
Yeah, sure. You can always refill it. Have you ever needed to refill it? Have you ever thought you've had too little smoke on your product? Sam.
And how much? And I used probably about 1.5 quarts of pellets. And by the morning, I would say about 95% of them were spent. Gotcha. So that was pretty good. All right. We'll take this brisket and put it over on my focaccia. And we got a focaccia brisket sandwich there.
Perfect.
All right. Now, I am going to clean up my mess and bring out some wings that I did earlier today. The same unit, a little bit different program.
Any other questions regarding the smoker or cooking barbecue for that matter while we're kind of on that topic? Can you do CVap sous vide via smoker? Of course, absolutely. You could add a, you could do it in that fashion. I believe, Sam, is your chicken that you're doing in that fashion, or am I mistaken? CVap or sous vide smoke?
I did not do a sous vide smoke on the wings. I have not tried that yet.
So the answer to the question is, yeah, you can do it. You just simply omit the dry air in the settings. If you want a blonde product and you're finishing it later, it would add a nice touch to the product.
Okay, let's look at some wings. All right. We have some chicken wings that were done in the same smoker that we did the brisket, not at the same time. It was done today. And our program for that was 180 and 325. And it took about 45 minutes or so.
They look awesome.
The color on them are beautiful. And I did use the pellets. This is a pellet cook, a pellet smoke.
So do you have a preference on pellets, chips, any other fuel for your smoker, Sam?
My preference is the pellets. I feel like they just do a better job. They're more consistent, they're more dense, and which means to me that they're going to burn a lot slower and consistently over time, and you get a much more condensed, pungent smoke. If you're going to smoke, why not smoke with a richer flavor?
Yeah.
In my opinion. Of course, it's all subjective, so you may not like that. You may want to do 15 minutes of smoke, and that's good for you. But you can definitely, there are some options out there from a pellet standpoint that you can get some pretty rich smoke on your products.
Too much if you go too long, depending on the product itself. I mean, brisket lends itself to be heavily smoked. Some items you just don't want as much on there.
I agree. And it's also going to depend on how large your oven is. So if you do a half size, like what this is, this is a 5-shelf unit compared to a 14-shelf unit.
Sure.
The amount of smoke is going to be a lot more concentrated in the smaller cabinet.
Yeah.
Just note that sometimes you get that acrid. It also goes back to what you're using for the smoke as well.
The cleaner the fuel, the better the product. Sure. Yep. We've got a question. Can you finish the smoked wings in the fryer?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, crisp them
have
up.
Some customers doing that. Absolutely. You can crisp up the, it doesn't take long. I would say a minute or two in 300, 350 fryer. A minute or two in a 350-degree fryer, and it's just enough to crisp up the outside. And then, of course, you can apply sauces or what have you, just like a regular kind of buffalo wing.
Got another question. Does the concentrated vapor and direct smoked affect the flavor profile differently than more traditional methods?
I have not done like a Pepsi challenge.
Yeah,
I would need
good
to
one.
do something side by side to answer that question. Perhaps. I don't know.
Could. It very well could. I agree with Sam's comment. Unless you're doing a triangle test, I'm not sure. I'm sure there's going to be some subtle differences, but I don't know how much of it would actually translate to the palate unless you're looking for them.
One thing to note, with smoking, like something like a wing, you could have easily just put this straight on a pan without a rack or anything like that. But, you know, I mean, intuition is going to tell you that smoke is not going to penetrate and you will get a blonde spot on the bottom part of your product. But
if you're intending them for the fryer, if you're finishing them in another method, it shouldn't.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
No,
But
okay.
does a great job. All right. Anything else about smoking right now? All right.
Not from our attendees.
Let me clean up. I'm going to pull a couple of these wings over here. And put the rest up, and then we're going to talk extended sous vide cookery.
Yeah.
Using beef ribs, beef short ribs. Okay.
So segueing into the short ribs, Sam,
Okay, no.
do you know which short ribs you were able to get? Which cut of short rib?
Oh, which one?
Yeah.
We've got three. We've got three versions. We've got a 72-hour, we've got a 48-hour, and a 24-hour. So I'm gonna pull the 72 out first. All right. Sous vide. Sous vide beef ribs. For this particular application, the program that I used was 131 on the vapor, the sous vide on the air. So it's a sous vide mode. Could you have used 131 on your air or 131 on your vapor, 131 on your air? Absolutely. Also, I want to show you that you can, doesn't matter if you do it in the bag, a traditional sous vide or actual sous vide, what sous vide means under vacuum. You can absolutely do this. Spencer, what's your take on bag versus bagless?
Personal preference is with CVap, obviously bagless. I rarely run into a scenario where I need a bag. And there's usually ways to get around that. Part of the beauty of having the bagless, in my opinion, is that the air that's circulating within that CVap, especially those long cooks, develops this kind of skin or this pellicle on the outside. It basically dries it out, which lends itself to being a great medium to finish the product. Even if you were to take one of those short ribs and throw it in the fryer or grill it off or sear it in a pan, it just makes it an easier process. And there's the aspect of not having to waste bags or the costs associated with that or the money to get a vacuum machine and yada, yada, yada. So that's primarily the reason why I prefer bagless options. And which one did you just cut?
I just cut the 48-hour rib.
Oh, that looks awesome. So she's going to show you a 24-hour, but the reason why we pick short ribs for this purpose, traditionally short ribs are braised. They're cooked well through, but through time and temperature, we can illustrate that you can break down the texture of a tough muscle and still have a great edible product. That's awesome. Here's a good question. I have legacy equipment. How do set points compare to new CVap set points? How would you program legacy for cooking bagless sous vide? It's pretty simple. You're going to adjust your doneness to reflect the vapor temperature, and then your air is going to, or your browning is going to be set to 0. So 131 and 0. What was the 48-hour one, Sam?
136.
So 136 and 0, and then for the
Yeah.
24-hour, 140 and 0.
Yeah, I wouldn't adjust anything other than whatever you're setting as legacy should reflect whatever's in the new cabinet. I wouldn't adjust anything other than that, because I think it would be a comparable cook.
Yeah. Now, one thing to note, especially when you encroach on the 48-hour, the 72-hour cooks, you are cooking at lower temperatures. Your product is effectively cooked through pretty quickly. It does reach that 130 or 136 mark within about an hour and a half. So it is going to be cooked through, but the texture is not going to be there. It won't be soft, easy to chew. It'll be really tough if you were to eat it at that, hour and a half mark. The added time at that temperature is what breaks it down and what makes it tender. So one thing when you get to the 48-hour and the 72 hours, make sure your environment is sterile as much as possible. There could be, if you have a stagnant unit or something that's not cleaned, you could promote some bad bacteria, not the good kind, that might turn your product, or it might not if you have a good enough environment.
Yeah, it's better to be safe than sorry. Thank you for saying that. I had a note to make sure good, proper sanitation techniques when you're doing extended sous vide like this.
One question, Sam, out of the 3 short rib settings, what is your preference?
I would say I'm an impatient person, so waiting 48 or 72 hours is probably not my bag. And I do prefer from a quality standpoint, the 24-hour rib. From a time standpoint, and I feel like it's comparable to everything else.
Yeah, they look nearly identical. Doesn't look like much size loss on it from here. So yeah, I think they're comparable in settings. I think if you want to boast that you cooked it for 48 hours, sure, go ahead and do that. But you can get away with a 24-hour.
Absolutely. And then when we were discussing this, if you remember, Spencer, we were just going to do 2. But I did a little research online, and I really felt like we kind of needed to include that 72-hour piece because it's all over the internet, and maybe we should address it and see what it looks like.
You're absolutely correct. A lot of people are doing it.
So, any other questions about extended sous vide cookery and beef rib application?
I'm going to be putting up a blog on bourbon barrel short ribs that were done.
Please, thank you.
So if you can't remember what we did here and the set points, please refer to the blog or always just get in contact with one of us at Winston.
All right, what's next? We have
dehydrating, something that you may have not thought of when using CVap, which is dehydration. It's a great way of preserving and alternately using equipment and not having to buy another piece. So
dehydration.
What'd you prepare, Sam?
I have some kale. I have prepared some kale that we've dehydrated. And then a plethora of other goodies. Some lemon zest.
Awesome.
Some more kale, because you can never have too much.
Yeah.
Some strawberries.
Oh, very cool.
And some beautiful grapefruit. Now I did some with sugar like these, which turned out beautifully, though they did take a little bit longer. Sugar's of course, is a humectant, so it wants to pull in and hold as much water as it can, but at some point it does evaporate. But it took probably a couple hours longer than the non-sugar coated pieces. Gotcha. But they did beautifully. And of course, you can do any sort of vegetable or fruit or what have you. What's been your experience?
I've done fish, actually. I made a fish jerky before.
Jerky, yeah, beef jerky.
I know that Donald has also done powders, kale, tomato. He made an umami powder, something that is just full of flavor, with a bunch of mushrooms and onions, and I'm not even sure what you put into it, to be honest. But
Yeah.
you can basically clear out your fridge and throw it into the CVap with no water,
No water.
125 or off and 125 air, and you can dry almost anything out.
That's the program that I use for everything here. So no water in the evaporator. Don't do that to yourself. I accidentally did that by accident and opened it up the next day and I was like, why is all this water in here?
Doesn't quite work.
Rookie mistake. So it's okay.
So you're effectively turning your CVap into a dehydrator.
Exactly.
Yep.
My next thing to do dehydrating wise is pavlova or meringue. So I'm excited. I seriously don't want to do it in the summertime. So maybe this fall.
Perfect.
I'm not afraid of the cook part, but the storage on the other side, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, you can definitely turn your CVap into a dehydrator and it works beautifully.
We've got a question. Roughly how long does it take to dehydrate?
It depends on the product.
Yeah.
I would say all this stuff was done overnight, so I wasn't watching it constantly. But I think the kale
Would be the fastest.
6 to 8 hours. Yeah, it was definitely the fastest behind the strawberries. Well, actually behind the lemon zest, which actually took quite a while.
Mhm. Yep.
And then behind the strawberries, it also depends on how big your product is. So how thick are you going to slice it?
I've done chilies, and that took upwards of 36 hours for me, like whole chilies. Just didn't realize that it would take that long at that temperature.
Right.
Obviously, if you turn up the heat, the dry air to say 140, 145, it'll accelerate the process. But you got to be mindful and watch it and make sure you're not burning it at that point because you're kind of broaching on cooking.
Exactly. That higher you say. I think 125 is a good middle of the road temperature for dehydration.
Here's a great question. Not using water, will Winston beep low water the entire time, or is there a way around it? So
say that one more time.
So I can answer that question. Yes, there is a way around it. In the new units, you can actually turn the volume off on the equipment. Alternatively, what I kind of did on the last time I did this, I used the old CACs and I actually just propped up the float with a shim. So that way it always thought that there was water in there. Just a little hack, but yeah, there is a way around that.
Right.
How long for limes or oranges? So how long was the grapefruit?
The grapefruit, I would say, was about 12 hours.
12 hours. So I would say comparable limes and oranges, all that citrus would be in that range, 10 to 12 hours at 125.
Yeah.
This is a fun one. You can store these for long term. There's always ways around in using the kale as a powder, tomato powders to garnish a dish or make something more robust in flavor because you're actually concentrating. It's just like dried spices versus fresh. They always say use less because it's more concentrated flavor when you're using dried spices.
I agree. Another idea, or at least a thought process, is if you're dehydrating and you have a large unit, you've got a lot of volume to use. So it's definitely, if you have cases and cases of kale and you don't know what to do with it and it's going bad. So just think about that in the back of your head. You always have that option if you have C-Vap.
Absolutely.
Dehydration. All right. What do we have next? All right. Soups, stews, and stocks. Say that 5 times fast. Soups, stews, and stocks. All right. So we have 2 from this category. Last month, I believe it came out, we did a beer chili, or what I just called chili, for a customer last month. And he only has a CHV unit, 4 or 5 shelf unit. I couldn't remember. He doesn't have anything else. And he calls me, he's like, can I make chili in that? And I was like, great question. Let's see if we can do it. So there is a blog. If we have the link, please share it in chat.
Will do.
So he gave me his recipe. Of course, I amended it a little bit. I bumped it up. It was for a smaller amount. So I wanted to kind of max out a 4-inch full-size hotel pan. And this also has beans in it. So the beans were not cooked with the chili base per se. It was an overnight cook at 200 and 230. And I'm going to pull those out first. I'm smelling the focaccia. I'm smelling the focaccia or the brioche.
That's one good way to know when it's done.
Now this was supposed to go to an internal temperature of 190. I would say we're well over that. Actually, let's check that. But see the beautiful shellac on the
So I
outside.
just posted the chicken noodle soup and the beer chili to the chat for everybody to
Thank
find
you,
what you
Spencer.
did. And I believe we have another one. How's the temp? Sam, what temp did you get on the bread?
Oh, it was like 205.
Oh, yeah. So
Yeah, 205.
probably went about 10 minutes too long. So that's what, 30 minutes to bake the brioche?
Yeah.
Which is comparable to a convection oven or a combi oven.
Absolutely. Okay, so the beans. This was just a plain pinto. A pound of beans, a gallon of water, a quarter cup of garlic, overnight cook at 200 and 230. And we've got beautifully rehydrated beans that are nice and tender. Smushy,
Yep, perfect.
good to go. Okay. And then chili was, you know, just like you make chili on the stovetop, except it's in a hotel pan and you're kind of opening the door, you know, breaking up the hamburger. You're, you know, doing basically all the things that you would do on the stovetop, just in the C-Vap. So I'm going to pull that out.
If you want more detail on that, the link for the chili, which is posted, shows the step-by-steps, talks in detail on that method.
All right, so these both were rethermed. So I did this ahead of time and I did a retherm on them. 200, 200 vapor, 200 air, 100% relative humidity. Does a beautiful job on the reheat and gets it up to temperature in about an hour and a half for you know, this load, 4-inch full-size hotel pan.
And that time might adjust a little bit if you were to load up your CVap. Obviously, if you were to put 10 pans on that, it might take another 45 an hour. But the thermal transfer of energy is really efficient, which is the magic of CVap.
I got it up to 165 and it's been holding for a couple hours. I'm at 155 right now. At this point, you would just marry the two together.
Perfect. Nice and easy, done in one shot.
Yeah. And even if you have stove space, you know, but you don't want to give it up. You know, you've maxed out all your stove space and you need to make a soup or stock or what have you. Don't count CVap out for that.
Yeah, agreed.
All right. And I have a beautiful chicken stock that Ryan is going to go get for me because he's awesome like that. And he's right there in my peripheral.
Perfect.
It's in the refrigerator behind you.
Sam, here's a tricky question.
Okay, tricky question.
Can you melt chocolate or cook macaroons in CVap?
Can you melt chocolate or cook macaroons in CVap? Now, you start. Now,
I'm afraid melting chocolate, the process is called tempering. It's challenging under the best environments. So the idea is to bring the temperature up and then back down. And I know that every chocolate has a different threshold from white to dark to milk. Can you do it? Theoretically, yes. If you're simply just melting it, for chocolate dip strawberries or something like that, yeah, sure, not a problem. But if you're going to that next evolution in tempering, it's going to be challenging. But yeah, you can. And the answer is yes, you can. I've done it. From Angie Kirby. The macaroons. What set points did you use for macaroons and CVap? I just don't like making macaroons. Period. I'm making them in CVap.
I gotta say, I've never. Now, a coconut macaroon I've made, but you're talking about the French macaroon, which I'm not familiar with. I mean, I'm familiar with eating them, of course, but not making. But I would think that if you can do
it's possible.
Yeah, I would say.
I believe it's possible. I'm not eager to make the macaroons myself, to be honest.
Well, how about we work on that, and we'll do a blog or some sort of content, social content, and we'll add that to our list of things to experiment with. Sure.
And if we get to 2.0 of weird stuff to do in CVap, we can add that to it.
The weird things you can do in CVap, but 2.0. Yeah. All right. Stocks. I made a beautiful chicken stock. I got us some dark meat quarters, put them in 2 6-inch full-size hotel pans. I had 2 of them. I did one in RTV, one in CHV, just to see if there'd be any difference. It was an overnight cook, and my set points were, the stock was, it's just like the chicken soup blog, 180 on the vapor, 210 on the air, and then an overnight hode, which I believe I did 150, 155. Okay. Minimal evaporation between either one of them. I would say RTV was probably slightly more significant, but you don't lose yield, or it's insignificant, I would say. And sure. It does a great job with stocks. And
it's nice too, because growing up working in kitchens, we always ran stocks overnight. Hoods are always on. Is worried you're going to burn the restaurant down, or you'd have to get in early because you knew that it was too much evaporation of the product. And this just makes it foolproof and easy.
I agree. And then the stock pots are so cumbersome and lugging them. Not to say that these can't get heavy, but it's a lot easier to maneuver, I think.
Yeah, I
personal
agree.
opinion.
So what'd you do? Right. How'd you prepare this chicken stock?
Chicken stock, basic. Chicken quarters, mirepoix, so onion, celery, carrots, water, boom. That's it. Went in straight into the CVap. Now, I will say, because I did try it first time, I put water in it. So I put all of the solid ingredients in first and then added water, and then went into the CVap. And I realized maybe I should just put the solid ingredients in first and then add my water, which was a lot easier.
Sure.
Yep.
Easier to just transport the hotel pans. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, it's definitely maximizing capabilities in that space.
Yeah.
All right.
Awesome.
Was that our last one? That went by really quickly.
Yeah.
All right.
Does anybody have any questions to go back from the beginning of this? Anybody have any questions on breads or smoking or barbecue, either to myself or Sam or anybody else from the Winston team? What's the best setting to hold smoked barbecue?
What are we talking about? We're talking about pork butt, brisket, chicken.
All of the above. Or let's do it in 2 categories. All of the above, or let's isolate the different proteins.
Okay, so general holding, I would say 140, 145. I would keep it kind of lower with a lower differential. That's my personal opinion.
I would say comparable to that, I would be around the 150 range with about a 25-degree differential. You want to keep that differential relatively low, especially if you're holding all day long. Corey chimed in and said, I've generally found that 140 to 150 vapor and 2 to 5 degrees of air.
That's
So
fair.
there's a few different ways to do it, Harry.
I will say this, it all goes back to what are your quality standards and what are your expectations, and then adjust from that. So
Sure.
if you want it more dry, you're going to create a bigger differential. If you want it more moist on the outside, a smaller differential.
Yeah.
So there's more than one way to CVap hold.
What are you making now?
Oh, a little vodka soda. And I'm going to garnish with one of my dehydrated grapefruits.
So that's how you get away with drinking vodka at work, is a dehydrated grapefruit and CVap.
I had to do something, Spencer. I had to. It's an application for dehydrated.
Yeah, looks great.
Ah. To you, to me,
Cheers.
and everybody in between, and to my 87-year-old aunt who wore makeup for the first time in her life today.
Thanks, Harry. Thank you, everybody that attended. And do check out Facebook CVap Operators if you haven't done so already. Should you have any questions, you have our numbers or our emails, so please do get in contact. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. See you next time.